Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. And when you think about the places to visit on a trip to Israel, certain places come immediately to mind. The Western Wall, maybe number one. And for that matter, the old city of Jerusalem, which is surely the spiritual symbol, spiritual home of the Jewish people, and is a most sacred site for many Christians, and in a different way for followers of Islam. Then there are the iconic tourist destinations, Masada, the Dead Sea. There's the city of Tel Aviv and neighboring Jaffa and Haifa. Of course, there's Yad Vashem and Mount Herzl, the Knesset building, a plethora of museums, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, the Diaspora Museum in Tel Aviv. There's the city of Tzfat in the north, the home of Jewish mysticism. There's the vacation city of Eilat in the south. There's the Jordan River and the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee in Tiberias, which became the center of Jewish life in Eretz Yisrael after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in the year 70 CE. There's the world-renowned universities, the Weizmann Institute, Technion. The list is endless. But there's one site that often is not included in a visitor's itinerary, and if so, they're missing out on one of the most magnificent tourist spots to visit in all of Israel. It's called Timna Park, Park Timna in Hebrew, and it's a spectacular stretch of desert in the south of Israel, about 17 miles north of Eilat, which is the site of the first copper mines known to the entire world. In addition to the awe-inspiring scenery, with a horseshoe-shaped valley surrounded by steep cliffs, with Mount Timna right in its center. And for families who love camping, it is heaven, with overnight campgrounds where one can rent a multi-family tent or stay in an air-conditioned room, a gorgeous lake ideal for paddle boating, mountain biking and rock climbing and hiking, and spectacular archaeological sites that date back to the days of King Solomon and then some, though there's a question as to what King Solomon's actual connection to that part of Israel was. Timna Park has a kosher restaurant on the lake, activities for children, including the making of King Solomon stamps, and one of the most impressive natural geological formations in all of Israel, known as Solomon's Pillars, which blew me away when I toured the Negev back in 1970. Timna Park is a national treasure, and it's one of the locations that should be on every tourist list for those visiting Israel. And who's responsible for the creation of Israel's Timna Park? Well, it's very much the joint creation of the JNF in America and in Israel, which is known as Keren Kayemet, together with the Ministry of Tourism and the Regional Council of Eilat. But Timna Park is the brainchild of a very special and Jewishly dedicated American family, headed by a real estate developer living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, named Avram Chudnow, Zichrono Livracha, who fell in love with the region and decided to give it an economic boost and to elevate its visibility and importance on the Israeli map. Avram Chudnow passed away in 2005 at the age of 91. But Timna Park remains one of his greatest legacies, in addition to his 4 beautiful children and his many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And now one of his sons, David Chudnow, has continued his father's work in developing Timna Park. David lives in Los Angeles, where he's been a practicing real estate and business law attorney for the past 45 years. He's also the co-founder of the Cardoza Society, a legal network outreach program. And David has served on the board of the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, for some 40 years. And most recently, David Chudnow has been devoting much of his time and energy to developing archaeological finds related to King Solomon in the southern Negev, and of course in Timna Park. And on this edition of L'Chaim, it is an honor for me to introduce you to David Chudnow, who joins us with his good friend and colleague, Erez Ben-Yosef, a professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University, who's directing the research being done into the Iron Age copper production in the Timna Valley. And David and Erez, thank you so much for joining us on JBS.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
David, I want to begin with you. First of all, speak for one moment about your father, Avram, who he was, and how your father became involved in developing Timna Park.
My father was a developer, a real estate developer, and he built thousands of homes and apartments and commercial projects all in Milwaukee and in Florida. But he became very enthralled with Jewish National Fund. He liked Jewish National Fund because it built concrete projects in Israel that you could go to, that you could touch. And he came from a charitable giving family. My grandparents were very involved in charity. So my father became very enthralled with Jewish National Fund, and he became very active on a national level.
I understand. David, what kind of Jewish family did you grow up in? What was your Jewish home like as a child?
As a child, we were conservative, but we always had this tradition of giving. My grandmother started, she had a little pushka box, and that was probably the start of my father's relationship to Israel. We had to put money in each week, into the pushka, the Jewish National Fund pushka.
Did you grow up with a strong feeling for Israel, David?
Oh yes, I did, and we grew up in a good synagogue. My father actually built 2 synagogues. He had to build the same one twice. He raised the money to do it, and he was head of the construction funding. So yes, but we had a very big family. My father had 9 siblings, and 7 of them survived. But we had many I had many cousins, and we had great seders and parties.
Oh, give me one memory from a seder.
My favorite picture of the Seder was from, we have pictures of all of the Seders going back to like 1940. And there was the one picture of all of the brothers and their wives, and they all looked like mafioso. They were all wearing fedoras because it was, a holiday, and they all looked like they were ready to go out and do whatever they were going to do.
All right. Well, first of all, Yasher Koach, Kol Tuv to you for all the work you've done. We're going to talk about it in a moment. But right now, Erez, I want to know something about you. First of all, you're gorgeous. Erez, where'd you grow up?
In Jerusalem. I was born and raised in Jerusalem.
And what kind of Jewish home were you raised in?
We are kind of not religious, not observant, but Masortiim, like keeping the tradition, having the Yom Shishi dinner and celebrating the holidays. In Israel, Judaism is mostly Orthodox.
And
The
that was not,
conservative reforms are less common. That's my background.
where were your parents from?
My mother is from Egypt. She was born in Cairo, and she came to Israel at the age of 4. And my father, from his mother's side, he's many generations in Israel. If you know Yoel Moshe Salomon, the guy that established Petach Tikva in the 19th century. So this is this side of the family, my grandmother's side.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's the family of Yoel Moshe Solomon in the 19th century, the late 18th century.
That is wonderful. And Erez, does your family consider itself to be Mizrahi? Are you Sephardi as opposed to Ashkenazi?
I'm a mix. So for my grandfather's side, I am from Poland. So I'm a quarter Polish, quarter like many generations from Jerusalem, but originally from Eastern Europe, and half Egyptian. So a real mix.
And what did you do in the IDF, Erez?
I've been to Golani.
You were?
Infantry. You know Golani, the
Yes. Good for you.
combat unit.
So Erez, at what point do you decide to devote your professional career to archaeology?
I grew up hiking a lot, traveling with my family, my father. So I wanted to do something in academia that has to do with the field. I wanted to be in the field, to do field work, to make observations on nature and archaeology. And I actually started with geology, with earth sciences. And later on, I took classes in archaeology and fell in love in this field. And I extended my studies to include also archaeology. And actually, from the beginning of my academic studies, I was always in between geology and archaeology. And this is also related to the mines of Timna. It's of course the geology of Timna. It's the reason why we have archaeology in this remote location. So this combination was always in my background. And it's mostly from the desire to be outside.
So now, David, you heard me do the intro talking a little bit about Timna Park. I want you and Erez, but I want to start with you, David. To what extent did you think I described it accurately? What would you add about what Timna Park is today if somebody visited Israel?
Timna is, my father always thought that Timna had great potential. And when he started, there was nothing there. It was a very difficult place to get to. People didn't go there. There was no attractions. So my father saw its potential and he fell in love with it, with all of the different items that you had talked about. He fell in love with the beauty of it. He fell in love with the geological wonders there and also the historic importance of it.
And when was that roughly, David?
1980, quite a long time ago. Right. So he saw the potential and it needed something because people weren't going there. It was very difficult to get there. It was about 110 degrees in the shade, but there was no shade. So he felt there needed to be an attraction. So anyway, he had gone on a fact-finding mission and he fell in love with the park. And then he met with Moshe Rivlin, and that really was a magic moment in time. Moshe was the world chairman of KKL at the time, and he was legendary. But Moshe and my father were really very similar in character. They were both extremely strong and extremely motivated and extremely doers. But my father then, after going on a fact-finding mission, went and visited with Moshe in his office in Jerusalem. And that was really where the magic happened. Moshe
by the way, in a certain way, David, it's quixotic because, I mean, again, I remember being in this area in the Negev, in the desert at Solomon's Pillars in 1970. There was nothing there. To think that somebody would come to Israel and say, you know what? Let's turn this into a major spot for people to visit who come to Israel. You know, in some way, David, it says something about who your father was, but you do understand it was like, this was not something, he didn't go to the place and say, oh, this is something easy for me to do. It was almost impossible what your father started out to do.
Well, as a matter of fact, that impacts the story that I'm about to tell. So my father went to meet with, first of all, I applaud your being that hardy to go to the park, because there were no roads. There was nothing there. You couldn't get a drink, you couldn't get a food, any food there. But so my father went and he met with Moshe Rivlin, and they were like, they're birds of a feather. And so my father was in Moshe's office, and Moshe's office was a total hagdish. He had many talents, but he was not a good housekeeper. There were files everywhere, and I mean everywhere. And some of them were piled 5 feet high. They were on the floor. They were in shelves. They were on his desk, and some of them were covered with dust. Well, Moshe was on the phone, and he always was on the phone, and he would take the calls. And my father was left to his own devices. But my father was not a man who would sit idly by. He would go around the office, and he was potchkeying. He was lifting up the files, he was looking at them, looking in corners all over the place. And lo and behold, he found on one of the shelves there was a set of blueprints covered in dust, but one of the blueprints had a tag, and it said Timna on it. Well, my father was a developer, and he rolled out the plans, and he looked at it, and what he saw just floored him, right? He couldn't believe what he saw. So when Moshe finally got off the phone, my father went over to him, and he said, Moshe, he showed him the plans. He said, Moshe, tell me, he says, is this what I'm really seeing? Is what I'm seeing true? This is the plans. It looks like the plans for a lake in the middle of the desert. And Moshe got a kind of a sheepish expression on his face. And he said, yes, Abe, you're right. He says, but forget about it. That's what you were saying. He says, no one will be able to do this. It's totally, and then he used the word you said, impossible. Well, that was all my father needed to hear, because my father specialized in the impossible. And once he heard that word, he was hooked immediately. And so my father turned to Moshe and he said, Moshe, he says, if I got you the money, and my father knew what was involved. He said, if I got you the money, he said, would you build it? And Moshe looked at my father, their eyes met, and Moshe knew that he had met a kindred soul. He says, if you get me the money, yes, I will build it. And as they say, from there on, the rest is history. And that's a beautiful friendship was born. And
what a fabulous story.
And the lake was built in 2 years. And they created these beautiful hills around the lake, which are also very good for acoustics. So they have concerts at the park, they have theater at the park, and it's really a wonderful place to go.
When your father was doing this in the 1980s, were you around at all?
Sure, and I was aware of this. I hadn't been totally involved in the start, but my father was there in 1984. That's when they actually had the dedication. They hadn't even begun the operation yet. After the ceremony, my father turned to the hard-bitten Israeli who was in charge of all of construction in Eretz Yisrael, and he turned to him and he says, you're going to begin construction in 2 weeks? The guy thought he was out of his mind. He thought he was joking, but my father was deadly serious. That's the kind of guy he was. 2 years later, the lake was done.
One more question, and then I want Erez to talk about some of the work he's done and talk about in general the archaeological significance of Timna Park and the area even beyond it. But David, what was the reaction of the Israeli government when your father first proposed this idea? And then throughout the years, has there been cooperation with the Israeli government? Has the Ministry of Tourism been cooperative? To what extent did this become something that was embraced by the state of Israel?
Originally, there was some resistance. I mean, this is Israel, and there's all sorts of different politics. So there was a certain amount of jealousy, say, by the city of Eilat. They only wanted their people to be in Eilat. They wanted all of the people to go there, and they saw this as kind of a competition. They didn't understand that when the tide comes in, everybody rises. So it took a while, took a long time for people to realize that this was a good thing for the area. And this was really, it became, ultimately it became a moneymaker. There are only 2 parks in Israel that make money, that make a profit. One of them is Masada, and the other one is Timna. In terms of government response, it was difficult in the beginning. It was very difficult. They had originally wanted this, the Ministry of Tourism and the Ministry of Antiquities and the Environment wanted this area to be totally natural. So this was a conflict. It's like one time my father had a donor who wanted to give $50,000 if we could put a palm tree at the park, at the lake, because that was the image that would, that people had of the sheik, the Sheik of Araby. But they wouldn't let us put in a palm tree because that wasn't indigenous to the area. Instead, they wanted us to put in an arbutus. And so we lost the donor because of that. Ultimately, the government has now turned around. When we first started the park, they didn't even want people to be in the park for over an hour and a half because they felt there were security issues. But now they allow, as you said, as you pointed out eloquently, they now allow overnight camping, and now we have these fancy tents. There's plans to actually begin a glamping system where people will come by and do these, luxury tents, and so we can raise more money that way.
Very, very nice. So David, when you add up all the money that it took to build what Timna Park is now, can you give us an idea of what it cost?
Well, our contribution, my family's was about $3 million, but my father was an extremely skilled fundraiser, and he probably raised an equal amount from Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a small Jewish community, but it for years, because of my father's efforts, was one of the highest per capita fundraising for Jewish National Fund in the entire country, more than New York. And my father raised money all over the world, all over the country, in San Diego and Palm Springs, and that probably was another $3 million. And then the government of Israel contributed money, and also JNF contributed money as well.
Well, it's a marvelous, marvelous success story. And it's not always that a family can make the kind of contribution yours has made. First your father, now you. And again, this is with JNF, and it's with the Eilat Commission and blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is, this was a vision of your father, and you are following in his footsteps. So I say to you again, kol hakavod, and it is a great gift you've given not simply to the state of Israel, but to the Jewish people who now come. And again, although this may not be as well known, maybe now that we're talking about on L'chaim, maybe more people who visit Israel when this whole coronavirus thing is over, maybe more and more people will go to Timna Park, but already it is a major center of tourist activity, and I wanted people to know about it. So, Erez, how do you become involved in the whole project, the archaeological side of the Timna Park experience?
Timna is one of the best places anywhere to learn about ancient copper production, because we have dozens of sites in the desert, unharmed by modern activity, and you can just go there and explore thousands of years of technological development. And Ben Rothenberg was the first archaeologist that was doing the archaeological project in Timna for many years. He passed away in 2012 at the age of 96. So he was still, very friendly, and he encouraged me to go to Timna and to continue what he was doing there for many years. But among archaeologists anywhere, Timna is very, very famous for being the place to go and study ancient technology. And as part of my PhD, I was working in the mines in Jordan, in Wadi Feinan, together with Professor Tom Levy and Dr. Muhammad Najjar. I did my PhD at the University of California, San Diego, in Jordan, on ancient copper production sites there. And I wanted to go to Timna and to study the Egyptian technology of making copper, because then, back in the early 2000s, the main sites in Timna were considered to be Egyptians, were considered to be related to the New Kingdom of Egypt. We're talking about the 13th century BCE. The entire story of Timna Park was related to the Egyptian Empire, and it is still today. And I will talk with David later on. We are trying to change the story, because one of the major discoveries of recent years show that this is the picture is more complicated, and the Egyptians were only a tiny part of a much bigger history. But back then, I wanted to study how, at the time of the Egyptians, people were able to take green minerals and make them into copper. And we have to remember that copper technology, metallurgy, was the high tech of the time. It's a very sophisticated, very complex technology, involved highly skilled craftspersons, the construction of furnaces. We are not talking about the mines. Mines was part of it. But we are talking about taking the actual stones, putting them into furnaces, and producing this precious metal. And this was this involved many different aspects, including the production of charcoal and the preparation of flux, additional minerals that they added into the mix. And this technology changed through time. And we wanted to compare and to study the Egyptian story in Timna, because Rothenberg, the previous archaeologist, found a beautiful Egyptian temple in the center of the valley. And because of this discovery, he thought that all of the smelting sites, all of the copper production camps are related to this period of the Egyptians. And we came to the valley and started a small project in 2009, first time. And based on the results, we knew we have to continue. We have to continue because there is much more to discover in Timna. And we work there almost every year since. And this is a project of Tel Aviv University, and we go there every year during the winter time, because in the summer you can't do anything except from being in the shade. So we go every winter for about a month for field work, and then we get a lot of cool stuff to analyze in the lab, in different laboratories later on. And it's just every year we have more and more surprises and very interesting finds. This is fun. We are doing it with some support of the park, of our friends in the south, and also some scientific foundation. The European Union was supporting us for a while, and now the Israel Science Foundation is supporting our research project. If we have time, I will share with you some of the discoveries.
Well, I want to get to some of this, but I want to understand a couple of things that you've said, which is so fascinating to me. First of all, King Solomon is roughly the 10th century BCE, 900s. You said that these copper mines and this copper technology was Egyptian and went back to the 13th century BCE?
And this was the picture until we started our project. The reason why I went to Timna in the first place is actually to study the technology of copper production in the Egyptian time,
Okay,
during
so
the 13th century.
what's interesting to me is in what is ultimately the Negev, in the lower part of the Sinai, prior to the establishment of King David's reign, the Egyptians were already mining copper from this part of the world, correct?
Yes, correct. They had a major project going on in the Sinai. There is the very famous site of Serabit el-Khadem, which is a turquoise mine. And next to that, there are also copper mines in the Sinai. And we believe that Timna was a northern offshoot of their activity in the Sinai at the time of the big Egyptian empire of the New Kingdom. So there was something there in the 13th century BCE. And this is the story that you see even still today in the park because of the work of Benno Rothenberg and the discovery of the Egyptian temple that you can visit. And actually, because of this discovery, all of the ideas about the 10th century King David, King Solomon were completely erased from the scholarly discussion. But as I said, as I started to say, one of the major discoveries was the dating of the smelting sites. And I was looking for the Egyptian materials, but when the results came back from the lab, they were all 10th century. As you just said, the 10th century BCE, between 1000 to 900 BCE, we are talking about David and his son Solomon. And this is a very contentious century in the archaeology of Israel and in biblical archaeology.
To what extent, if there's any extent, to what extent was King Solomon involved in any of the copper mines in the Sinai?
All the way to the Sinai, they probably didn't get, but Timna, which is on the border of the Negev and the Sinai Peninsula, we now know, this is, everybody, we can't argue with the dating that the most intense activity indeed occurred in the 10th century BCE, at exactly the same time of King David and Solomon in Jerusalem. And the big question is still if these are related to Jerusalem in any way. And we do not have any direct evidence that David or Solomon were ever there. We don't have inscriptions, but we don't have inscriptions from this period anywhere, so it's very hard to tell. But we have more and more evidence of some kind of connections with the Mediterranean region, including the Judean hills, in the shape of the goods that they were trading with, and other kind of evidence that suggests strong connections between the north of Timna, meaning possibly Jerusalem, to this region.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, so we have the food. All of the different aspects of the food came from the north, including grapes, almonds, olives. All of the 7 species of the Bible, all of them are there. And this is, I have to say, another amazing thing about Timna, which is the preservation of organic materials. It is deep in the desert, and we have a unique preservation of stuff that we don't have in anywhere else, even in other places in the Israeli desert. Timna is kind of a unique location where we have not only everything I just said, but also textile, cloth, leather, ropes, many things that will, even if you excavate in Jerusalem for another 200 years, you won't find, because they completely decomposed and they are gone. And in Timna, we have that. Inside of the waste piles of the furnaces and the smelting activities, you find these fantastic materials, and some of them are definitely from the north. We have also fish, and surprisingly, all of the fish that the people ate there are not from the Red Sea, but from the Mediterranean, from Philistia at that time period. And also, what we see more and more together with the work in the mines in Jordan is that in this particular time, 11th, 10th, 9th centuries BCE, the Araba Valley, Timna, Jordan, this was the center of copper production of the entire ancient Near East. We have other researchers, other groups working on metals in Greece, in Egypt, showing that the chemical signature of the artifacts in these remote locations are from the Araba, showing that the metal came all the way from the Araba Valley. So in a short time in the history of the region, the Araba takes the role of being the lead exporter of copper. And this is usually the role of the island of Cyprus. Cyprus is a major copper producer throughout the millennia, but in this particular time, it was after a major collapse of the Bronze civilizations, the Bronze Age civilizations. And this was when the local tribes of the Araba had the opportunity to produce copper on a large scale, a very large scale of hundreds of tons of copper. And it's just reasonable to assume that everybody in the region wanted to benefit from this lucrative trade. And you cannot exaggerate the importance of copper. It was not only for
By the way,
beautiful stuff.
I want to ask you, I want you to explain to our audience, what was copper used for that made it basically the predominant metal of its time? Where would I found copper in the ancient Near East?
So first and foremost, it was used for weapons and also agricultural tools, mostly in the form of bronzes, which means a mixture of copper and tin. But copper was the basic raw material for weapons and agricultural tools. And the society that was controlling this production was it's like controlling oil today. It's a very important resource, a very expensive resource, but also very important for your own society if you want to be able to produce weapons and agricultural tools. But we also have, for pure copper, a very significant role in religious activities, including the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. If you read in the books of Kings, you see that King Solomon was using huge quantities of copper in the construction of the temple. But it doesn't say from where this copper came from. We know about the wood. The wood are cedars from Lebanon. Cedar is my name. Erez is the cedar tree. Gold from Ophir. Silver from Tarshish. About the copper, the Bible is silent. And I think I can have a reason for that if you understand that Timna is not exactly within the land of the Israelites.
Yes.
It was subjugated to the Israelites, but it was operated by the local Edomites, right? The Edomite kingdom, which is mentioned in the Bible. And this is quite amazing because if you read in 2 Samuel, you read about David's conquest of the Edomites and killing 18,000 Edomites south of the Dead Sea, exactly this region, and putting garrisons all over the land. And until our recent work in Timna, we didn't have any reason for David to go to such remote places. Mm-hmm. Why would he go to this remote desert, invest in this conquest and risk his people for what? For a few, I don't know, tents in the wilderness? But now, not only that we know that people were there, an actual thriving society, we know that they also were engaged in the most important industry of the time. And if you are looking for a source for the richness of Jerusalem in this particular time, copper could have been part of it. And for you, for the many, everybody that comes to visit us during the excavations, ask this question about the connection to Jerusalem, if we found direct evidence for this kind of control of Jerusalem. But I don't think that for this kind of connection, we necessarily have to find a positive evidence. Because imagine that David could have put a tent on the trade route and threatened the Edomites. He could say, you know, you give me some tax, some of the income, and I will not disrupt the trade. Everybody will enjoy it. From the eyes of Jerusalem, this was subjugating the Edomites. They benefited from this. The Edomites worked for Jerusalem, and from the eyes of the Edomites, they paid some tribute to Jerusalem. But the Bible can remember this kind of subjugation and have this story about the big conquest of the land of Edom, which continues later on at the days of Solomon. Solomon builds a port in the city of Eilat. Today it's a very nice tourist destination, the city of Eilat. The Bible says explicitly that King Solomon builds the port in the city of Eilat in the land of the Edomites. So already during this period, they remember, they know who are the people, the local people there. Now, just to finish a possible reason for why the Bible is silent about the origin of the copper, it's well known that the Edomites are the most hated peoples, among the most hated peoples of the Bible. Edom is Esau, who was the brother of Jacob, and from a brotherly nation they became bitter enemies. During the Babylonian conquest, the Edomites probably betrayed their neighboring nation of Israel, and the biblical authors remembered that, and the Edomites became abhorred by the biblical authors, including specific prophecies dedicated to this abhorred nation. And you cannot attribute a sacred metal which was used in the temple to a people that you are completely religiously hate. And when you understand the magic of producing this material, you understand its sacred qualities. It was not only shiny and beautiful, there was magic involved. There was some kind of the help of the gods, or the help of the one God, doesn't matter. But there has to be some involvement of the divine in order to make a successful smelt. And this made copper important in religious activities, not only during this period, throughout history. And you cannot say that the metal in the temple, in the Jewish temple, came from these abhorred Edomites. So we have kind of a silence about that. And all of that kind of information brings back to the table the big question of King Solomon's mines. If indeed Solomon benefited anything from the copper production in the south. And it's a catchy title, King Solomon's Mines. We know the movie. It's a book from the 19th century of Henry Rider Haggard. But the book itself is about diamonds and gold in South Africa. I think it's possible that the actual mines were in the Araba, were operated by the Edomites. And the connection to Jerusalem is not direct, but indirect, but possibly an important source for the wealth of Jerusalem at that time period. And believe me, I'm here in Tel Aviv University, which my colleagues here are very critical about the biblical narrative and biblical archaeology in general. So we have a lot of arguments about this topic because of these issues about if the united monarchy of David and Solomon was real or not. We have to remember that there are serious scholars, archaeologists and biblical scholars, that believe that either they were completely fictional figures, or that if they were historical, they were very little chieftains, or some even call them like mafia leaders in the hill country of Israel. I don't think so. I think also that there is also a kind of mistreatment of these societies who had a nomadic origin, and we always think about them as the modern Bedouins. And I think it's like a misinterpretation of the potential of these biblical era nomads. And I think this is exactly what Timna and the recent research in Timna contributes to the discussion about the power of nomads at that time period, because the Edomites in this early stage were still nomads, but they, controlled a huge empire of copper, and about the exact connection of archaeology and history in this particular time of the United Monarchy, David and Solomon, and all of that.
That is, but I could listen to you for hours. I appreciate your enthusiasm. David, as you listen to Erez, what thoughts go through your mind? And, in some way, I hope you take pride in what your family has created based on the way Erez describes what we learn from it. But I'm just wondering, as you listen to Erez, what thoughts come to your mind?
That Erez's work is extremely important. Actually, he describes the link between the Bible and Timna. He didn't really get into Timna itself. Was a princess, an Edomite princess. She's mentioned in the Bible. And what Erez's dig did is he actually found evidence of Edomite presence in this area, and actually they were the ones who were controlling the mines. I'd really like to hear Erez talk about some of his finds, in particular the kilt.
I think what David is most excited about is what I mentioned earlier, is about the organic materials. So for example, regardless of the historicity of David and Solomon, if you want to have any information about the fashion of people, of elite people in this period, the only place you can find physical evidence is Timna. And we piece together small fragments of textile in order to understand the fashion. And we recently found out that they were using a complex dyeing technology. Of course, not in Timna. They were trading the expensive textiles, probably in exchange to the copper. But in Timna, these textiles preserved. And together with, I have to say, and it's very important to mention that, of course, in this project, we have many different experts involved. Experts that are working on the animal bones, on the fish bones, on the textiles. There's many different experts working on many different aspects of the project. And most of the work is, of course, after we come back from the field. We invest time and efforts in the lab. And the textile is quite amazing, and I think this is a major contribution of our recent research together with Dr. Naama Sukenik. Recently, we found that some of the dyes were the sea snails, which are with the color purple, which is the color of kings. And I can go on and on regarding the observation on the organic materials that are quite exciting and also contribute to the story about connections with Jerusalem.
I have one more question for you specifically. Erez, when you make these finds and you begin to understand what people thousands of years ago, what they were able to do and what they were able to create, are there times that you are just amazed at what human creativity was capable of thousands of years ago? Do you ever say to yourself, wow, the human experience, and we live in the modern, postmodern world, whatever that means, but you're living in a world 3,000 years ago, more, and I'm wondering what your emotional reaction is at times to what you learn people were capable of.
Yeah, I came to this topic of technology, ancient technology, with kind of a lot of misconceptions. Like I thought, everything they discovered, it was only by chance. They threw a copper mineral into the fire, and kind of in a way that they are completely different from us in the modern era. And with the years, my experience showed me with above any doubt that they were exactly like us. They were curious, they were innovative, they were open-minded. We see in this technology of copper production some people that were invested in R&D, research and development, and were supported by the society to invest in research and development. So the creativity and the technological achievements for that time were part of a major continuous effort of, with the humankind to get better and better with time. And it was not that in the past it was only technological discoveries by chance here, by chance there. You can see that this was an important part of the human experience to try and discover more technologies, new materials, and things like that. And Timna, in that regard, is a window into this technological evolution, innovation, invention.
Well, what you do is spectacular. Yasher Koach, and I hope you continue. You seem very young, Erez. I hope you do this for years and years and years, and that the more you do it, the more we will learn, not simply about the past, but about who human beings are. And as you say, their creativity and their inquisitive nature and their desire to make something of this world. So you are making a marvelous contribution. It's been wonderful meeting with you. And again, I could listen to you for hours and hours and hours. And David, this is not a story most American Jews know. So that for you to give me this time and to bring Erez with you is so kind of you. I want to make sure I give you the last word. If there's anything else you want to say to the JBS audiences, which is watching not only throughout America, but we're now online global. I've got people watching us and emailing me, David, from literally all over the world. Is there anything else you want to say about Timna Park or your work before we bring this to a close?
Thank you. I definitely would. I wanted to discuss a little bit about my father's legacy and what he saw as his legacy regarding his life, his entire productive life. He felt that Timna was his legacy because it wasn't just for 25 years, it wasn't just for 50 years. He saw Timna Park and his contribution. This park could last, he thought, for 1,000 years. It's already been there for 3,000 years, and he loved that aspect of it. He wanted to see generations of families and children and their children and children enjoying what he had created. That's the last thing I wanted to say.
Well, it's a wonderful legacy, and you've helped that legacy move forward. It is now your legacy too. It is so kind of both of you to spend this much time with us. David, this has to be only part one, okay? So ultimately, I hope you'll give me a chance to talk to you and Erez more as we go forward. But in the meantime, I wish both of you kol tuv v'hatzlacha in all you do. May you and your family stay safe and be well. And may there come a time in the near future that I get to be with both of you in person. But thank you very, very much.
Toda rabba.
Toda rabba. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was David Chudnow and Erez Ben-Yosef, both of whom are making an extraordinary contribution to Jewish life through the research being done in the Timna Valley at Timna Park. And when you do plan your next trip to Israel, I hope you put Timna Park on your list. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed here on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org. And remember, you can now listen to the L'Chaim podcast. Just download L'Chaim and listen to it anywhere, in any place, and any time you wish. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.